Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Metropolis Radio. Today, we are continuing to look at the movie theaters versus streaming debate with this article here. Post-pandemic box office and streaming change how we define movie success. Box office revenue is down and streaming is growing, meaning it's time to redefine the way we judge whether movies are a success or failure. And as we covered in the last one with regards to James Gunn being right about the movie theaters versus streaming debate, a lot of times a movie's legacy is really defined on home video and not in theaters. But let's go ahead and dig through this article anyway. The shrunken post-pandemic box office and rise of streaming changed the way movies make money, and thus our understanding of what makes a movie "quote unquote" successful. The box office isn't bringing in the numbers it used to, and more movies are getting simultaneous streaming releases, in addition to an increase in streaming-only content, so movies aren't generating revenue the same way they have historically. For decades, the biggest movies were only released theatrically, making the box office a focal point for reporting and discussing a movie's performance. Audiences would often root for or against the box office performance of content they liked or disliked, and box office figures would be propped up next to review scores as evidence of a movie's popularity or lack thereof. Well, let's see. Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides was a god-awful movie, but that movie still made over $1 billion. So, yeah, I see the point that they're getting to. You know, a bad movie can make a shit ton of money at the box office. And weekly box office reports were consumed as definitive evidence of a movie's performance. More and more big movies were already coming out on streaming before the pandemic, including big award winners, but that was accelerated thanks to the pandemic. Now that the year's biggest movies have a split or even exclusive theatrical release, and box office revenue is much lower than just a few years ago due mostly to factors that have nothing to do with movie quality, we need to reconsider the way we evaluate a movie's performance and thus redefine what it means for a movie to be successful. And here's point number one in the argument here. Box office was never the full story of movie performance. First of all, it shouldn't need to be said, but box office performance is merely a measurement of commercial performance, not artistic merit, and they're not wrong when they say that. Again, like I said, a shit movie can still make a shit ton of money at the box office, so it should have very little relevance to the audience. Also, plenty of major classics from It's a Wonderful Life to Blade Runner to Fight Club to Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Plenty of bona fide classics didn't perform well in theaters, yet found big success later on TV, physical media, or streaming. Again, we did go over that in the prior video on the movie theaters versus streaming debate. Post-theatrical revenue also tends to have a higher profit margin, so while it may not have the same volume as box office revenue, the long-term performance of a movie after it leaves theaters can have a significant financial impact. Then, of course, for big franchises, there's other non-box office factors such as merchandise revenue, which can be even bigger than box office for some franchises like Star Wars. There's also sequel and spin-off opportunities, which can be even bigger than the original film, such as The Dark Knight, which grossed over $1 billion internationally after Batman Begins, totaling just under $372 million. In that case, while Batman Begins wasn't the biggest hit in the world, its strong critical reception gave Nolan's Batman trilogy the credibility it needed to justify two more billion-dollar earners in The Dark Knight and The Dark Knight Rises. And we can sit here and debate the quality of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy all day long. That is a separate video for another time. So while box office was the first, the most available, and often the biggest metric of success, it was always only one piece of a larger puzzle. Now it's not even the biggest piece anymore. Now here's the second point that they make. Streaming already made the box office obsolete. For a long time, box office was a primary way to generate enough revenue for big budget movies, but as streaming revenue grew, streaming platforms could produce blockbusters of their own, meaning box office wasn't the only game in town. And again, that is a matter left up to debate, since a lot of the big streaming services like Netflix and Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney Plus like to keep those streaming numbers close to their vest. So we truly don't know how profitable the movies were for them. It's not clear exactly how streamers calculate an individual movie's profitability, just as I said many times prior. But they clearly consider them profitable, as streaming exclusive movies are only getting more popular. Regardless of the performance of any individual movie, streaming revenue is already a much more lucrative route than the box office. Again, that is a matter left for debate. Netflix's subscriber base has grown to the point where the platform's yearly revenue more than doubles Disney's biggest year at the box office, and Disney Plus is close to passing that same line. But again, how much money does Netflix spend on original content? I think it spends, like $15 to $20 billion a year on original content. So yeah, the money is coming in, but that money's going right back out the door. So how profitable it really is Netflix? Factor in the fact that streaming platforms don't have to split half of their revenue with exhibitors in the same way as studios do for box office revenue for theatrical releases, and it's clear the biggest profit opportunity is streaming. Again, that is a matter for debate. Jason Kilar says there could be movies with billion-dollar budgets eventually, a feat that may never be practical for a theatrical release. And here's the third point. The post-pandemic box office won't fully recover. Theater attendance was already declining long before the pandemic. Again, look at those charts. It's usually around 1999 to 2000 is really when it started. Ticket sales were consistently declining for 2 decades before coronavirus arrived. So the virus just sped the process up. Again, what I have been saying from the beginning with this. While the post-pandemic box office has made significant strides towards recovery, it's not ever likely to hit pre-pandemic levels again, especially with concerns over the Delta variant. Studios are shifting more movies to streaming releases, and exclusive windows are shrinking, which will only lengthen that divide. The theatrical experience will never go away so long as there's demand for big picture and big sound, but this isn't a societal shift that will revert to pre-pandemic status if and when the world returns to quote-unquote normal. As a result, theaters will soon be seen as a secondary source of revenue for Hollywood at best, not the primary driver, assuming that shift hasn't already happened in some corner offices. And like they said, the theater attendance was already on the decline, and I believe it was in the prior video or a couple prior to that, I don't remember, where, the article was making the claim that, hey, these, you can't keep increasing the ticket prices to make up for those losses, because at some point, then more people won't show up, so then you have to keep jacking up ticket prices, which will just continue the downward spiral. But here's the fourth and final point of this article. Studios are the only ones who know if a movie is successful. While box office hasn't always been the most nuanced metric, it was a fairly transparent and concrete indicator of a movie's performance. Lack of studio transparency over the true cost of most movies and infamous Hollywood accounting means even if a movie's budget is reported, costs could be either exaggerated for tax purposes or minimized to make a movie look more profitable for PR purposes or to impress stockholders. So profitability may still be a bit of a question mark, but it can be an easy if incomplete indicator of overall popularity. Now, thanks to streaming, we rarely have. Actually, let me go back to this one right here. Where was it? But it can be an easy if incomplete indicator of overall popularity. Not true. They just contradicted their last point that movie theater attendance has been going on the decline if they're making the argument that box office is an indicator of overall popularity. It doesn't take a lot of people to grow. It doesn't take a lot of people going to see a movie to make $1 billion as it did 20 years ago. Let's be fair. That's due to declining, theater going audience and increased ticket prices. But let's get back to the article here. Now, thanks to streaming, we rarely have any way of even knowing how many times a movie was viewed, much less by how many unique households. Streaming platforms may report vague statistics, but even then, the numbers are circumstantial to the number of subscribers on the streamer and what they consider a view, such as reports that count 2 minutes or more of streaming a single view for that title. Also, regardless of number of views, we don't know how any individual title impacted the streamer financially, such as how many subscribers signed up or stayed signed up for that particular movie, or how long they stayed subscribed after seeing it. Even movies like Michael Bay's Six Underground, which Netflix says is one of their most viewed titles of all time, and therefore one of the most viewed streaming titles ever, can also be considered a failure by Netflix, who decide it wasn't worth producing a Six Underground sequel, which we have already covered on this channel. So even when streaming numbers are released, there's no way of knowing if seemingly top-performing content is actually benefiting the platform. This might make it hard to discuss the commercial performance of streaming content, as only the streaming platforms themselves truly know if a movie is successful. but it's not really all that different than evaluating the commercial performance of a theatrical release. The box office merely gives us the illusion of more numbers to evaluate, they just lack full context. Of course, this calls into question why audiences should even be aware of the performance of streaming content unless they're a shareholder. Audiences are now free to evaluate a movie on its own merits without the distracting question of whether it outgrossed the competition or drew enough profit to justify its existence. If a studio likes the impact of a streaming movie, they'll make sequels of more content like that, and if they don't like it, they won't, and maybe that's all the audience needs to know, and that's how this article ends. I think people still cling on to box office revenue as they have brought up here, that it can be an easy, if incomplete, indicator of overall popularity. It was the only number that we really had for a long time, but like I just previously pointed out, you don't need as many people going to see a movie today to have it gross $1 billion as you did, 20 years ago when Star Wars The Phantom Menace came out in 1999 and grossed over $1 billion. That was a huge fucking achievement back in 1999. Nowadays, that's just another Tuesday. And guys, that's pretty much all I've got for this. We've gone for as long as we need to go, and I've done a lot of videos on the movie theaters versus streaming debates, so I implore you to check those out here on the channel. If you stuck around this long, thanks so much for doing so. And if you guys have been following me long enough, you know I'm terrible at ending these videos, so I will just see you guys next time.